Have you ever wondered what neuroscience is? There are three types of neurosciences. Developmental neuroscience describes how the brain forms, grows, and changes. Cognitive neuroscience is about how the brain creates and controls thought, language problem solving, and memory. There's also molecular and cellular neuroscience, which explores the genes, proteins, and other molecules that guide how neurons function. Chante will dive deeper. You might also wonder what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. This illustrates how DEI efforts are not designed to account for how the human brain reacts to external triggers such as risk, change, uncertainty, difference versus similarity, and power dynamics. Therefore, substantially improved outcomes can be achieved by designing DEI efforts to factor in these considerations and work in harmony with how the human brain becomes mindful and aware of these patterns. We are so excited to have you here with us today. This conversation is going to be on fire. I am looking forward to you meeting my guest today. We value your feedback and opinions. Please drop them in the chat. We intend to respond to as many comments and questions from our audience. This takes a great deal of effort to pull off, so I am grateful to all my loyal guests. Every week, we create new content and look forward to you subscribing to our YouTube channel. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI consultant and authoress of Emotional Intelligence, a toolkit for managing DEI. The link to purchase the book will be in the comments. And for a living, I help organizations implement DEI plans and reframe their cultural mindsets through thought-provoking workshops and webinars. Join us as we continue to share the different voices in this DEI space. Today, we have Chante Jovan, I'll ask her how to pronounce it, Taylor, a neuroscientist success trainer, author, and founder of the Optimind Institute, who ignites minds and hearts worldwide through coaching, training, and speaking. The mind and brain are the keys to our ultimate fulfillment, creativity, productivity, focus, happiness, success, and humanity. The ability to get out of our comfort zones to pursue our adventures, professions, and entrepreneurial heights is 90% brain management. Oh, this is going to be an interesting conversation. So the rest is learning new skills, taking action, and being held accountable. Chante has shared the stage with success expert Jack Canfield, Transform Minds at TEDx, and part of the Forbes Coaching Council. Her 007 mission to guide ambitious people to harness their brain power to reach their full potential in life, profession, and business. Chante, thank you so much for being here today. I want to allow you to welcome yourself in your distinct way, and we want to get to know you on a deeper level. Tell us one thing also that we don't know about you.
Yes, thank you for having me, Rochelle, and hi, audience, for joining, or if you're watching the replay. I am Chante Jovan Taylor, neuroscientist and success strategist, founder of the Optimind Institute. I didn't start off that way. I was a neuroscientist in the lab physically for 10-ish years. And then I went into clinical neuropsychology, where I helped assess people with dementia and brain injuries, and help them to navigate really what was wrong with their brains. So I did that 10 to 12 hours a day. It wasn't fulfilling enough for me. And I felt like I wanted to use neuroscience in a more empowering way, because my natural strengths, my natural tendency was to embrace the patients and tell them what was going right with them and how they can capitalize off their existing brain strengths and what was going right with them as well. So I navigated my profession a little bit differently. and decided to go on the path of empowering everyday people specifically within organizations, and then leaders and coaches to understand the brain in a more empowering way, because the more we understand the brain, the more we can intentionally live at the highest level of ourselves. And just a quirky fact about me, besides my red glasses, is that I love all things superhero and shiro, like X-Men. I love people, being exposed to new powers. I love all things Star Trek, because to me, that's a vision of how us humans can evolve into our higher selves with technology, with higher awareness, with heightening our senses. But we must understand the brain, and we must be able to intentionally navigate our brain spaces and heighten our brain spaces to get to that vision.
I love it. When you say to heighten our brain space and to better empower our behavior, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, so we all know about our five senses, right? We're taught that as early as 5 years old, right? Uh, Help me out, Rachel, to name them: hearing, vision, smell, touch,
Sight and sight.
and sight. Okay. But we know that in neuroscience, there's other senses, right? There's intuition, that sixth sight. And then Dr. Daniel Siegel has started the revolution of what's called mind sight, the seventh sense. And I believe deep down inside, we have infinite number of senses. But we're evolving as a human species, so our brain tells a story, right? We have different levels of circuitries and brain regions, and some of those are ancient. And then we have the most advanced region of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, right? The most modern part of our brain that separates us from our animal brothers and sisters. So we have to learn to gradually understand, first of all, and then use those higher brain regions intentionally. And when we do that, we're able to activate more of its potential. And the way our brains are set up, we're able to continue the growth process. And the more connections we make from our 100 billion brain cells, the more we can get to the next level of ourselves. But those connections have to be intentional. They have to be not what's going to detract from our human potential, those primitive, I call them primitive human activities, or thoughts like, being exclusive, or anger, or jealousy. Not that there's anything wrong with the human emotion of anger. I think emotions can be our superpowers if we know how to use them. But there are human activities and thoughts and actions that are keeping us in our lower kind of primitive era, right? But once we release those, once we start realizing that there's enough for all of us, we don't have to suppress people's genius because of how they look. We don't have to suppress people's finances because we want to stay on top. We'll start to see the evolution of our human potential, because you never know what's in the mind of a child in poverty. But because they're in poverty, their potential is not unlocked or unleashed, or it's very challenging then for them to get to that mental space. And we're missing out on what could be for this human progression. So we have to get rid of those human instincts that don't serve us anymore, those human behaviors that don't serve us anymore, and tap into those human possibilities in our brains, in the recesses of our brains, that's sitting there waiting for us to activate them, so we can go beyond this universe, tap into another part of ourselves and our humanity as well.
Right. I did a few psychology classes, a long time ago, and in articles also that I've been reading, more recent articles, if you can explain what a neurotransmitter is, because I'm picking up some things that you're saying that I think also or not just what a neurotransmitter is, but what is it for everybody to understand? So what is it? What part of our brain are we generally using? Is it the frontal cortex? Because I know that fully develops by the age of 21, I believe. And I think there's also 10% of our brain that we use. Am I correct?
Well, we actually use all of our brains for the most part. The person who said that we only use 10% of our brains, he was in the 50s. There was no MRI, there was no brain imaging. He was just kind of going off his gut, right? I mean, even if you go back in history, thousands of years ago, they thought the brain did something else. They thought it was connected to our intestines or something like that. They didn't even know it was a part of our human ability. It's what makes us human, right? So knowledge evolves as technology evolves and as understanding evolves and as our what I call the prefrontal cortex. I also call it the leadership brain. As it evolves and how we start understanding how to use it. So if you were to look at if you were to be in space and look down at the Earth, you wouldn't just see America active, right? You wouldn't just see lights on, right, in America and thunderstorms happening here and there. You would see that all over the world, all over the globe. Okay, so there's activity going on. Maybe at different times, but there's going to be a huge percentage of the world that's activated. That's how the brain works. So as I am speaking to you, your auditory cortex is,
Activated.
activating as you're nodding, your motor cortex, and then your verbal cortex is you have to understand and make sense of what I'm saying. So you can see that there are a number of regions of your brain that's activated in this moment, and you're not even speaking because I'm speaking right now, right? So we can throw away that myth, but what may be more accurate is to say that we only understand 10% of our brain. There's so much more that we need to know because it's only been in the last 20 years that we've really been able to spy inside the brain in real time and see what is going on when we are thinking or about to make a decision and then actually make the decision. And we can see the discrepancies when people say one thing, but they're really thinking another or feel another. And so as technology keeps evolving and as there are more minds, right, on studying the brain, that we get a better picture and a deeper, more richer understanding of how this beautiful brain works. So as far as neurotransmitters, for people who never heard that term, it is exactly how it sounds. Okay, I love to simplify neuroscience because it's not about using fancy words. It's about, do people understand their brain? How can I utilize words that resonate so that people receive this knowledge so they could be more intentional about how they use their brain? So a neurotransmitter, the word, neuro, you can connect that to the brain, right? And transmitter, something is being moved from one thing to the next, right? Or communicating like a radio, right? So that is exactly what a neurotransmitter is. It's a brain cell that releases these little transmitters, these little chemicals that can talk to other brain cells, right? So when two brain cells can communicate, that allows us to do this human experience like talk or think or move or smell or hear or turn the TV off or something like that. So we have these trillions and trillions and trillions of neural messengers, chemicals, neurotransmitters, I like to say it in different ways, that allows us to experience this human life.
So our neurotransmitters can be also new neurotransmitters can be created as we learn a new language or read a new book or learn new vocabulary. Is that correct?
So the neurotransmitters are chemicals. They're the chemicals within chemicals and molecules within neurons, brain cells, that allow brain cells to talk to each other. Okay. So they can't be changed. Okay, we're not creating new neurochemicals as far as we know right now in this part of our human evolution. We just have standard neurochemicals, which we're still learning more about, right? Like dopamine, which is for motivation and mood regulation and learning, or maybe you heard of serotonin or oxytocin or acetylcholine. All of those neurochemicals to either do something different, or they have some overlapping role in the brain. So when you're talking about learning a new language, you need those neurochemicals to be released to say, hey, language part of the brain, we're learning this new word. How can we link it with something we already know? How can we put it from our short-term memory to our long-term memory? So that's actually the role of neurons, brain cells, to make those connections between each other to seal in that new learning. But it is being mediated and modulated by those neurochemicals. So we're creating new brain connection. Think of an oak tree, right? That would be akin to the part of a neuron that can then branch out. The branches are going to make new connections for your new learning to 1 to 10,000 other brain cells.
Right. So we have a great capacity to continuously expand ourselves when given that chance. And I realized something when I was pregnant. I was reading to my daughter, listening to music. I put the music close to my belly. I did a whole bunch of things that I thought would just have her have a different experience while she was in the womb. And there was one particular song that I would play and she would just stop moving. And when I gave birth, I continued playing that song. And every time I played that song, she would cry. And then when she developed language, she told me, she said, I've been listening to that song for a long time. And mommy, it makes me very, very, very sad. And that's exactly the experience she was experiencing when she was in my womb. It triggered something in her brain that made her sad. And then I realized she would stop moving. She'd stop kicking and, moving around. But if there was, merengue or salsa or Haitian music or, something different, then she was stirring inside. So I think also we have, like you said, we have to be able to empower what we already have and to be able to embrace it. But if you can explain what is a neuroscientist success trainer? Like, what is it that you do, not to drop all your nuggets, but how do you go through a process with someone or a corporation?
Okay. So as a neuroscientist, I bring my neuro perspectives to any kind of human situation. So that means my brain is trained to see when someone tells me something or when they're not telling me something. Sometimes I pick up on the nonverbal. I am able to see, okay, what is their brain doing, right? Or how is their brain affecting my brain? So I can look from the lens of neuroscience to say, this is the part of their brain that's being activated. Now, let me bring it to their awareness, because I'm all about empowering people about how their own brain works. And then once I share how their brain works and what's going on, because they're in a state, or they have a conundrum, a challenge or something, once they are empowered with their own brain, then I can give them a neuroscience-based strategy. And that, just because I'm saying neuroscience-based strategy doesn't mean it's a new strategy, but it's a strategy that I can then back up with neuroscience. So the goal is not to give clients or organizations 1,000 new strategies to learn. That's overwhelming, and it's not going to make a difference because learning is very complex when it comes to the adult brain. Okay. So it has to be very meaningful. Um, it has to be relevant in the moment. And it has to be somewhat familiar. Okay. The strategy for the person to really um, have change or implement the change or consider the change. So let's say, for example, I'm having a conversation with a client, or I'm training coaches, because that's a big part of what I do. I train coaches on how to be neuroscience-based coaches. If I'm picking up on someone saying they're really tired all the time, right? They can't focus in the daytime. I may ask a series of questions that may lead back to them not getting enough sleep, right? And so I'll start asking questions around their sleep routine. I'll start asking, when you start sleep, when you start getting ready for bed, what are you doing? How long do you feel like you stay asleep? Are you, waking up? So they'll tell me through questions. Questions are empowering. Questions are a huge part of being a neuroscience-based coach and leader, because from there, my brain is putting together the story, the pattern. And then from there, I can say, okay, if they have trouble falling asleep because there's a lot of noise, I will tell them, first of all, I'll tell them the power of sleep, right? There's a lot of benefits to going to sleep. And so once they have that new respect for sleep, for example, it helps to regulate your hunger hormones, right? So you don't overeat. It regulates your stressors. It helps brain cells to communicate with each other, because it's at night where the little janitors come out and clean up all the metabolic debris, so you can, be more focused in the daytime. It's where your brain can organize new information you just learned, like the language. Maybe you learn a section of the new language for that day. So I can tell them based on their story or patterns how valuable sleep is for their particular issue. Okay. And so I'll give you an example. If they have a trouble falling asleep because there's so much noise, then I will help them to navigate the noise, how to deal with the noise from a neuro perspective, so that by the time, so they can train their mind to quiet down at night when it's time to, go to sleep. Because sleep doesn't start when your head hits the pillow. It actually starts earlier in the day. It's intentionally training your brain to quiet down, to shut down. And so by the time you get to your bed, your brain will have know the instruction and adhere to the instruction of quieting down the brain and then going to sleep. So it just depends. That's why, I go through a whole training with coaches and leaders, because it does take time to understand the brain, but also to understand it in context of being a coach and a leader, and not just giving a one size fits all, like you just need some more sleep, right? No, this is the part of sleep you need to understand and what it's doing for your brain. And then these are specific brain-based strategies based on your need for this part of sleep. So understanding neuroscience can allow you to be more targeted in your leadership and coaching approaches, both for their specific challenges, because everyone is different. Everyone has different challenges, even though we all have the same brain regions, but they're all designed differently. They're structured according to our challenges, our strengths, our personalities. So it's very important to treat them as such, and then be more targeted in coaching the different parts of their brain and lives at the same time.
Right.
So that's just one part of sleep. And I have neural perspectives for just about every part of the human experience.
Right. I'm so happy you mentioned that because that's something that I instill within myself, and having been a good sleeper and then not a good sleeper after I gave birth to my daughter, being, just worried and motherly all the time and having these thoughts, I realized, or any thought, I realized that without the amount or required amount of sleep that I personally needed, and I generally need about 8 to 9 hours of sleep.
Mhm.
And if I do not get those hours of uninterrupted sleep, then I feel groggy in the morning. My shoulders are slouched. I feel that there's an energy that's been seeped out of me. My brain is foggy. I'm not able to make quick decisions. Uh, I don't respond as quickly as I would like to. And I realize, even though I know the day needs to move on, I'm not as productive. I'm a little sluggish, and I'm not in a good mood, to be very honest with you, Chante. I'm just
Here,
when
here.
oh my goodness, my household knows that if mommy did not get enough sleep, do not even ask her a question. Do not ask her if they could do anything. Everyone
Mhm.
knows just to stay away, but at the same time, it's because I am already aware that I did not get enough sleep. So there's I have bedtime. My 7-year-old has bedtime. I have bedtime at 8 o'clock. And that's our next question. How does the brain become chaotic? So my phone is next to my head. There's no TV in our bedroom. I'm not on a device. And, I start breathing deeply because I meditate a lot. So I breathe deeply just to calm my nervous system down, to calm all the inner chatter. You understand? And I don't think people realize how important it is to have the sleep, to be able to have a productive brain and an active brain that's not feeling the sluggishness and the tiredness and the slouchiness of the shoulders, and like you said, like you agreed, it's the grumpiness. You're not in a good mood.
I mean, and is that any way to show up in life? I mean, who
Right.
wants to be around a grumpy person at work, at home? And that doesn't feel good. Like you're aware that you're grumpy and moody and don't want to be bothered, right? And that affects your relationship. So you can see how central good sleep is. Like we have to stop as human beings. We need to stop taking it for granted. That is why I don't give a bunch of new things for people to do. I just take them deeper into our existing human activities that we have the science to say, if you improve this, if you deepen this experience, you can go to the next level of your human potential, your productivity potential, your earning potential, your thinking potential, your creative potential, right? Your relationship potential, all of your human potential gets amplified because sleep in itself is a force multiplier for this human experience. And that's just sleep. Wait till I really get going, Rochelle. I mean, that's how deep it is. And, I see Chevy in the comments here. She's a graduate from my Optimi Institute. And, we know that, she knows that I can spend 8 hours just talking about sleep, right? That's how deep the rabbit hole goes. But, when I'm training my coaches and leaders, I take them about 12 to 20 layers deeper. But I tell them, you have to be aware of how far you're going to take your clients or
Right.
your organizations on these different topics, right? And how you're going to communicate it. Because understanding and using neuroscience in your strategies, it's an art and a science.
Right.
Okay. So you can't overwhelm people with, all these scientific terms because they won't get the message. They won't learn it. So we have to present it in such a way that makes sense and not just want to sound smart or, operate from ego. That's not where we're coming from with this knowledge. It's all about empowering people with this knowledge, with the power of their brain and how it works. Most people do want to learn about their brain, but they don't want to be overwhelmed by the terminology. So it's very important to explain it in such a way that, first of all, is relevant to them. I mean, when someone says I have a hard time sleeping, you don't want to tell them all the things about sleeping. That's too much. That's
Right.
why it's important to ask specific questions so you can really drill down what part of the sleeping is the challenge. And then you can, bring in the strategy, the neuro-based strategy that will
Right.
help them to deal with that.
Right. I agree. Mary Walton, thank you so much for joining the chat. She had a question earlier, and she said, question, could it be that because we only understand 10% of our brain activity, we are limited in our ability until we are exposed to greater and more?
Oh, that's a great question. And I've never been asked that before, so I appreciate that. Chevy knows I love questions, because it allows me to think from another part of my brain and put together in the moment insights. So everybody does not understand 10% of their brain. Okay, so let's put that in context. When I say we only understand, I'm really talking about the people who are doing the research, right? The people who are learning intentionally about neuroscience as it relates to their work, their profession. Those are the people who are getting closer to learning more about 10% or more about the brain. The masses still don't know about the brain. Okay, so that percentage is even lower because we don't think about our brain like we think about every other part of our body intentionally. Even though we wake up with our brains every day, we know what's up there, but we're not intentionally doing the human activities or expanding how we use our human activities to directly impact different parts of the brain so we show up at our highest levels every day. So the more you understand about the brain intentionally, systematically, and there's different ways to do that, but I say learn it systematically. That means go through a program, go through someone who can take you on a journey of the brains, because you want to make sure that you're not learning all these different pieces of research, because it's overwhelming. It's a lot of knowledge out there. And so if you're not in this industry, it's hard to put all the pieces together and then implement it, right? And let alone teach other people. So you need someone to say, focus on these parts of the brain and the information, and this is how you use it. And this is how you can specifically integrate it into your world or your profession or your organization, so that their learning journey makes sense, and they're able to implement it. So for the most of the population, neuroscience and how it can be infused into our professional, personal, and organizations, it's still a new phenomenon. So most people don't know that much about their brain. The percentage is even less.
Right.
So we have a lot more room to grow, humans, right? We have so much potential. And I'll just say this, Rochelle, when a brain cell is activated, it's actually called an action potential. Okay, so we have a lot of potential in our brains. This is a couple of brain facts. We have about 80 to 100 billion brain cells in our brain. Okay. But each one of those brain cells are able to connect like wires, like branches of a tree, to 1 to 10,000 other brain cells. So we have enough wiring in our brain to stretch from where we're sitting all the way to the sun. That's like 90 million miles of wiring. So how much potential? If we only understand 10% of that, just think if we understand, just halfway of that, how much more we can be in this human experience. I'm really excited about the future for humanity once more people understand systematically and strategically about how the brain works so that they can use it in their own genius and in their own platforms.
Right. What do you think are the biggest obstacles that people face today when it comes to empowering their brain or disempowering their brain?
Oh, that, you know what? I will say this. Most people are not operating in their genius. And when I say their genius, I'm not talking about, oh, you have to have an IQ of a bajillion, IQ points. When I say genius, I mean you operating in your strengths. And when I say strengths, I'm saying you operating according to your curated mental pathways that was designed for you. Okay? Because when we are developing from being in the fetus all the way to our mid-20s, we have a lot more brain connections. And that's Mother Nature's role, design, to allow us to make sense of the world. That's why kids always ask, why this? Why is the sky blue? Why are carrots crunchy, right? Why do rabbits have fur? All the why questions, right? And so we have so much more connection so that we can figure out how to survive in the world so we can make sense of it as quickly as possible. But by the time we become adults, so I'm talking mid-20s on up, we're losing connections. Our neural pathways are getting more refined according to our personality based on our genes. So there's some genetics there. You can't change genetics, people.
Right.
But that's a beautiful thing because
Can
that's
it also
why we
be
have
based
different
on
personalities.
experience? Exactly. Could also be based on experience.
Yeah. So it's a combination, right? So our mental strengths are based on our genetics that make us naturally good at stuff, okay? That make up our personalities where we have a tendency to be more quirky, or maybe we're more serious, or maybe we're more empathetic, right? That's personality. And then experience curates that. Our interest then amplifies those existing neural frameworks. So we're built with individual neural frameworks, and then experience, life curates them and strengthens them based on what we are exposed to, and that can strengthen those mental pathways, but also what we naturally gravitate towards as far as knowledge and skills when we go to school and all of that. So our adult brains look very differently than our younger brains, than our teenage brains, even our young adult brains. And that's what I say when I say, just to bring it all back around, that's your genius. That's where you need to be operating from. That's where you're going to light up the most when you are activating those existing neural pathways, your specific strengths, because the brain doesn't really want to learn new stuff. It wants to activate the existing neural strengths and make new connections off of those existing mental strengths. That's just the way the brain would prefer to optimize its energy and continue to refine you as you move forward on your human journey. So we need everybody operating in their strengths. And when you don't, that's where the overwhelm kicks in. That's when you feel like you're defeated because you're learning all this other stuff that the world is saying you should focus on, like your weaknesses and your new things. But if you operated in your strengths and learned based on your strengths, you added new information based on your existing strengths that are relevant to move you forward, people would see a lot more satisfaction. They would see a lot more happiness and fulfillment, and their brains will be happier and continue to move them forward on a more successful path.
I'm so happy you said that. You know, there's something I started to practice maybe about 10 years ago. Now I have reminders on my phone, and it might be a little bit simplistic. However, it does help me go through my day. So, you know, I have affirmations that I have as reminders on my phone. I am brave. I am courageous. You know, take a break,
Mm-hmm.
nap.
Mm-hmm.
So I have these reminders. And at the beginning, I really didn't think it was effective because I wasn't practicing it. And then when I started to practice it, I realized that there was a space that I was able to create where I would stop and be grateful for something, or I would stop and, you know, and affirm something to myself, 30 seconds, a minute, or visualize something. And I realize, and I'm sure you can probably explain it in a more scientific way, but for me, I realized what happened was there was a gap where it was resting. My mind was resting. It was in a restful state. And after those 30 seconds or a minute or 5 minutes, however long I would take to give my brain a break, I found that I was able to make more decisions, better decisions, more productive decisions, and sometimes not make decisions at all. I've had to learn through that process to step away from things I couldn't handle, to not overcommit anymore, right? So I think
Okay.
it's key. What you're doing is phenomenal for us, and you're triggering me throughout this whole show because now you're making me realize that, you know, what it is that I'm really practicing and practicing at home, especially with the little one, that it's key to our, you know, to us being happier. We're in a better mood. I see it with my daughter. You know, meltdown can come at around 4 o'clock. I know to bring her snacks. I know to bring her food. I don't ask too many questions, you know, because I know what I'm going to be faced with because she's tired. And we go back to the sleep because she's tired. So we come home, we do something restful, not too stressful, and then we do the homework because I know that the brain went through all this learning, like exactly what you said. And now it's time to give it a break, like your heart, it needs to rest at night. You know, like your body needs to rest, or like the exercise, it needs to be energized or activated. You know, you said, you know, we have these cells that need to be activated. And I think we need to be able to understand that it's a practice, right? Which leads to our next question. It's what can people practice daily to modify this you know, this mindset? Again, not to give away all your techniques, but small things that people can take away with.
We wouldn't even have time,
I know.
Rachelle, to
I
give
know.
away all my techniques.
I know.
But I
One
love the
technique.
story you. Yes, I just want to say that I love the story you gave about your daughter, because what I heard was you were more open to understanding her world. That is one of the most powerful places to be in awareness when you're dealing with relationships, especially your kids, because they are relentless, right? It's like adults can barely manage their own emotions, but we expect kids to handle their emotions, right? And just like you explained how you felt when you didn't get enough sleep, hey, we act like toddlers too. We're just in adult form when we don't, you know, we can kind of, you know, a little bit more discipline and not screaming and pouting. But, you know, we want a nap,
Sometimes.
we want to be fed, we want all that. So they're just little
Right.
versions of us when we
Right.
are cranky, right? But once you realize that, then your response, like you said, is different. It's more,
Right.
you have more empathy.
Yeah.
We need more empathy for
Amen.
ourselves and for others. And that is, if people can take away one thing from this conversation, is that when you start to intentionally learn and use your brain at a higher level, your
Mm.
level of empathy goes up,
And
and
the
then you
stress
just
goes down.
exist. Your stress goes down, or your ability to manage stress goes down, and you just see the world differently. You see people differently. Your fuse is longer, it gets longer and longer, and then you can show up in your power. Like maybe let's say, for example, the Ukraine war is going on right now, right? And
Right.
maybe just that experience of knowing what's happening has increased your empathy a bit, right? And maybe your natural strength is to maybe not do something hands on, like organize a big fundraiser. Everybody doesn't have the strength to organize, right? But maybe your strength is giving, right? So that's the, if I'm going to give a tip, I don't really like saying tips, tricks, hacks because they don't go deep enough.
Right.
So what I would say, a major strategy, let's call it a major neuro strategy that everyone can explore and start to implement, is to dig deeper on what your strengths are. Like, get intentional about where your strengths lie within you. Because once you bring that from the subconscious to the conscious, once you write it down, and your brain can start processing, okay, how can I operate more in my strengths? If I'm a giver, if I can organize, right? And I will say this, once you find those strengths that you have, maybe you're a good communicator, right? Once you put your strengths down, you also have to realize there's a spectrum within every strength. So all communicators can't get on stage and speak to crowds, right? That's one part of the spectrum. Maybe you're a good communicator because you can mediate a conversation between two people. That's a different skill set than getting on the stage and talking to 1,000 people, right? So even within your strengths, I want you to figure out, okay, what part of communication am I strong at? What part of organization am I strong at? What part of writing am I strong at? Because just because you like to write doesn't make you a great novelist, right? Maybe you're good at summarizing things. Maybe you're good at writing long articles versus short articles, right? So that would be something that once you learn that, once you can identify that for yourself, you will start to see yourself become more aware and amplified in who you are. And then from there, your potential will start to be amplified as well, because now your brain is focusing on your strengths and the activities and needs and what you need to read or who you need to connect with to strengthen those mental wiring for yourself, so you can show up as your superpower self.
Right. And I'm happy you said that to close, because we need to operate within our strengths and not our weaknesses, from what I took from your conversation. And I think that's what disempowers us, is when we work with the weaknesses, when we already have the strengths that we can exponentially work on, so we could diversify ourselves and reach our fullest potential and be our happier selves. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's the brain's natural tendency to work with its existing strengths. Okay. It takes more mental energy to start from scratch and to learn something new, because our adult brains are different. We don't have access to those connections that we had when we were just trying to learn about the world. That's why it's so important as well for adults to understand the adult learning brain. Right. Our
Right.
brains are, and nobody's really talking about this, especially not from a neuroscience point of view. So there's a lot of things that need to be shared with people who are trying to get to the next level of themselves, right? Especially us who are at that self-actualized place. And we know that there's something more we can do with our experiences and knowledge and human potential. But once we make that realization, we think we have to start from scratch somewhere, which is
Right.
not what we need to do. We need to start from our existing strengths and build on those, because the brain likes that. First of all, it rewards us when we are stimulating those existing strengths, and it disempowers us, like you said, if our brains have to start from scratch and use all this energy to start to make new connections and learn all the things, and so we get defeated. We feel like
Right.
we're not smart anymore. We talk bad
Right.
about our brains, about our memories and all of that. But it's really because you don't know how your brain works, and your brain wants you to focus on your existing strengths and build neural pathways or branches from those places. That's why it's called a mental strength, right? Those
Right.
empowering strengths. There's too many weaknesses.
Right.
People, I mean, that's like an infinity, but your strengths it's curated for you. It's made for you and your brain. And so capitalize off of that. That's where your true power lies.
Oh, I love it. We can go on for another hour. This has been phenomenal. I understand now from a different perspective why I do the things that I do and what keeps me sane.
Exactly.
Right?
Understanding the neuroscience is not about you becoming a neuroscientist.
No,
It's
no.
about the deeper why of
Right.
why we do what we do, and how can we enhance this human experience to go to the next level of ourselves.
Absolutely. Oh, this conversation has been amazing. Amazing. I am
Yes.
so happy we had this conversation, especially for our audience. As we reach the top of the Diversity Connects Us hour, I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. I want to encourage you to connect with Chante on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Chante, for all the information you imparted. It was a great pleasure to have you. This podcast highlights lived experiences, inspirational stories of strength and tenacity. We will share profound and courageous dialogues that influence DEI by breaking the barriers of labels, because we do label ourselves, stereotypes, confronting biases, and offering best practices to achieve a more significant cultural mindset. Stay tuned on March 29th with Dr. Duget as we will talk to children about race. Chante, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, audience, for watching and your engagement. I look forward to connecting with you on any part of social media, and you can also just type in my name and get to my website and sign up to understand a little bit more about your own brain and how far that can take you.
Thank you.